The room went quiet so fast I could hear the ice settling in the bottom of the champagne glasses. I was standing near the head table, still holding my phone up from recording, when my mother's words landed and stayed suspended between us. She hadn't raised her voice, she hadn't cried. She'd smiled, actually, that soft, practiced smile she wore to church luncheons and hospital waiting rooms. But the sentence itself didn't belong in a golden anniversary toast. "Thank you," she'd said, lifting her glass toward my father, "for standing by me after the accident when you didn't have to." There it was, simple, polite, devastating. The band behind her missed their cue. My aunt froze mid-sip. Someone at table 6 let out a nervous laugh that died immediately. My father didn't look at her. He stared at the tablecloth, his hand tightening around the stem of his glass until I was sure it would snap. I remember thinking, very calmly, that my mother had never been in an accident, not the kind people whispered about, not the kind you thank someone for surviving. She'd always been careful with language, careful with memories, careful with the past. She was the woman who edited family stories before they left her mouth, trimming anything sharp, anything unnecessary. For her to say that publicly, with a room full of people who'd known them for decades, felt like watching a crack appear in something I'd always believed was solid. Applause came late and uneven, like people weren't sure if they were supposed to clap. My mother lowered herself back into her chair, cheeks flushed from champagne and nerves, and reached for my father's hand. He hesitated before taking it. I caught his eye then, just for a second. I'd grown up believing I knew that look. Stoic, loyal, unshakable, but what I saw in his face that night wasn't pride or affection, it was fear. Later, people would tell me I imagined it. That anniversaries make people emotional. That older couples reminisce strangely when they drink. But I know what I saw. I know the way my mother's fingers trembled when she set her glass down. I know how my father excused himself before dessert and didn't come back. And I know that, standing there in a room I'd spent months decorating with gold ribbons and photo boards and carefully curated memories, I felt something slip loose inside me. Not suspicion yet, recognition. Before I go any further, I want to slow this down for a moment. If you're listening to this while folding laundry, or driving a familiar road, or sitting quietly somewhere you didn't expect to stay this long, I hope you're comfortable. These kinds of stories don't rush themselves. They unfold the way memories do, unevenly, gently, and sometimes all at once. I'm telling this from a distance now, but at the time I didn't know what I was holding. I just knew something had shifted. If you've ever felt that subtle internal click when a truth starts to loosen, you'll understand what came next. Wherever you're listening from, whatever decade of your life you're in, I want you to imagine a moment you thought was safe. A celebration, a milestone, and how fragile those moments can be when one unguarded sentence slips through. That night didn't explode, it didn't collapse, it simply stayed with me. And sometimes that's how the most important stories begin. Before that night, my parents' life had followed a rhythm so steady it felt permanent. They woke early, even in retirement. My father made the coffee, strong, measured, always the same scoop-to-water ratio, while my mother buttered toast and stood at the kitchen window watching the birds argue over the feeder. They read the paper at opposite ends of the table, folding sections neatly, commenting only when something truly interested them. It was quiet, companionable, predictable. They had lived in the same house for 42 years. A modest place with a low roofline and a backyard my father kept meticulously trimmed. My mother tended the roses along the fence, talking to them as if they were stubborn children. Every Thursday, without fail, they went to the grocery store together. Every Sunday, they sat in the third pew from the front at church. Nothing about their life suggested hidden drama. Growing up, I'd thought of their marriage as solid rather than romantic. There were no grand gestures, no theatrical arguments. Love in our house looked like refilling someone's water glass without being asked. Like keeping the porch light on until the other came home. Like quietly folding your spouse's sweaters the way they preferred, even after decades. That was the marriage I was honoring when I decided to plan the anniversary party. I wanted it to feel like a thank you for staying, for consistency, for showing me what endurance looked like. I tracked down photos from relatives, scanned old albums, labeled dates in my mother's careful handwriting. I booked the hall, chose the music from their era, even found a bakery that could recreate the lemon cake from their wedding. My mother tried to talk me out of it, of course. She said it was too much fuss. That people would feel obligated, that she didn't like being the center of attention. My father said little, just nodded and told me to do what made me happy. In hindsight, I see how tightly she held herself that entire evening. How often she reached for her glass. How she watched the door as if waiting for something or someone to arrive late. But at the time, I was wrapped in logistics and pride. Watching my parents smile at each other across linen-covered tables felt like confirmation. Proof that I'd gotten it right. Even when my mother stood to speak, I wasn't worried. Her toasts were usually brief, gracious, safe. I didn't know that safety had a shelf life. The days after the party passed quietly, but the sentence stayed lodged in me like a splinter. After the accident, I replayed it while washing dishes, while driving home from work. While lying awake in the early hours listening to the house settle, I tried to attach it to something concrete, a fall, a car fender bender, a hospital stay I'd somehow forgotten, but there was nothing. No scar, no story. No family anecdote that fit. When I called my mother the following Tuesday, she sounded thinner somehow. Her voice still warm, still familiar, but stretched tight around the edges. "You overdid it," she told me, laughing softly. "That party, I'm still tired." I asked her if she'd enjoyed herself. She said yes. I asked if she remembered what she'd said during the toast. There was a pause, not long, just long enough. "I might have rambled," she said. "Champagne does that." I almost let it go. I wanted to. Denial is a comfortable place when the alternative feels like disrespect. My mother had carried our family on her back in ways I was only beginning to understand. Digging into her past felt intrusive, ungrateful, but something in her tone, careful, clipped, told me the subject was not closed. I started small. I pulled out old photo albums from my childhood. I looked for gaps, missing years. Faces I didn't recognize. There was one black and white photograph tucked into the back of an album, loose, unlabeled. My mother stood in it, much younger, her hair darker, her smile unfamiliar. Beside her was a man I'd never seen before, his arm resting too comfortably around her shoulders. I brought it to my parents' house the following Sunday. My father saw it first. He didn't ask where I'd found it. He didn't ask why I was holding it. He simply said, "That's old." My mother reached for it, her hands steady, her face unreadable. "Where did you find this?" she asked. "In the album," I said. "Who is he?" She looked at my father. He nodded once. "That was before," she said, "before everything." It wasn't an answer, it was a boundary. And for the first time in my life, I realized my parents had built a wall I'd never thought to question. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It came the way old houses reveal their damage, a soft spot in the floor, a hairline crack, a smell you can't quite place until it's everywhere. A week after I showed them the photograph, my mother called me late in the evening. My father was at his weekly card game, she said. Her voice had that deliberate calm she used when she'd already decided something difficult. "Come by," she told me. "I think it's time." She was sitting at the kitchen table when I arrived, the same table where she'd packed my lunches and balanced checkbooks and taught me how to hem a skirt. There was a small stack of papers in front of her, yellowed and uneven. My father's chair was empty. I was married before, she said, before I could speak. I nodded. The word before felt heavy, unfinished. I was 22, she continued. His name was Thomas. She told me he was charming in the beginning, that he made her feel chosen, that her own parents had been wary but she'd married him anyway. The first year was fine, she said. The second was not. She didn't dramatize it, she didn't use words like abuse, she described facts. Raised voices, a shove that became routine, money disappearing, a temper that turned the house into something brittle and dangerous. Then came the accident. They'd argued in the car, late at night, rain on the road. He'd been drinking, she'd told him to slow down, he hadn't. The car left the road. She woke up in a hospital with a broken arm and a concussion. Thomas never woke up at all. It was ruled an accident, she said, folding her hands together. But it wasn't that simple. She told me about the argument, about grabbing the steering wheel, about the sound metal glass, the world folding in on itself. I lived, she said, and I hated myself for it. My father entered her life a year later. He was a friend of a friend, quiet, observant. He listened more than he spoke. She told him everything, she said, not all at once, but honestly. He knew, she said, what happened, what I'd done. I felt something shift then, deep and unpleasant. He stood by you, I said. She closed her eyes. He helped me survive it, legally, emotionally. He helped make sure the past stayed buried. The word accomplice didn't come from her mouth, it formed in my own. My father hadn't just married her, he'd protected her. He'd helped ensure that no one ever questioned the narrative again. That record stayed clean, that my mother could start over with a new last name and a quieter life. I thought of him sitting in police stations with her, of him advising silence, of love expressed as loyalty to a fault. When my father came home that night, I didn't hide that I was there. He took off his coat slowly, as if he already knew. I wondered when this would come up, he said. I asked him if it was true. Yes, he said. All of it. I asked him how he could live with it. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and said, because I knew the woman she was and the man she'd survived. I wanted to be angry. I wanted someone to be the villain. But sitting there, watching two aging people who had built a life out of silence and endurance, I felt something closer to grief. My father hadn't betrayed me out of malice, he'd done it out of love, and somehow that hurt more. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the faint glow of the streetlight through the curtains, trying to reorganize my entire understanding of the people who had raised me. Every memory felt suddenly unstable, as if it needed to be re-examined under this new light. In the morning, I did the most ordinary thing I could think of. I made coffee. The ritual steadied me. Then I started asking questions, not accusatory ones, not yet, but careful, deliberate ones. I asked my mother what she'd been afraid of all these years. Being seen, she said. Being reduced to the worst thing I ever did. I asked my father how far his help had gone. Far enough, he said, and no farther. He explained the lawyer friend who'd advised them. The record sealed, the decision to move towns. Nothing forged, nothing fabricated, just omissions, timing, the quiet cooperation of people who believed in protecting a woman who'd already paid enough. I asked myself whether I believed that. Over the next weeks, I read everything I could find: old newspaper archives, court summaries, police blotters. There was a brief mention of the accident in a regional paper, a single column, factual, unemotional, no follow-up. No questions, the story they'd told matched the record. That didn't make it easier. I wrestled with what to do next. Whether I had a responsibility to expose the truth, whether silence made me complicit now too. Whether love could justify secrecy. In the end, I chose conversation over confrontation. I told my parents how the knowledge changed me, how it complicated my respect for them without erasing it. How I needed honesty now, even if it came late. My mother cried then, really cried, for the first time since I could remember. My father held her, the same way he always had, steady, protective, quiet. "We didn't mean to give this to you," she said. "This weight." I told her she hadn't given it to me, that it had always existed. I'd just finally been allowed to see it. Secrets don't stay contained once they're spoken aloud. They don't rush out either. They seep. I didn't announce what I'd learned. I didn't confront extended family or demand explanations from people who'd played their small roles and moved on. But families are perceptive in ways they pretend not to be. Tone shifts. Invitations change. People sense when the shape of something familiar has altered. My aunt called first. She framed it as concern. "Your mother seems tired lately," she said, "more than usual." I told her the truth in pieces, not the whole story, not the sharpest edges. Just enough to explain why my mother had been quieter, why my father no longer met people's eyes the way he once did. My aunt went silent, then said she'd always wondered, that there had been rumors years ago, nothing solid, just questions no one wanted to ask. Word moved carefully after that, not gossip exactly, more like acknowledgement. People adjusted their understanding without demanding details. Church friends were gentler. Old acquaintances kept conversations polite and shallow. No one accused, no one absolved. My parents felt it most. They stopped attending social events together. My mother bowed out early when she did go. My father became more protective, less patient with idle curiosity. The community didn't turn on them, but it shifted like furniture moved just enough that you stub your toe in the dark. I watched them navigate it with dignity. One Sunday afternoon, my mother told me she was relieved. "I was so tired of pretending nothing had ever been broken," she said. "There was no public reckoning, no dramatic fallout. Just the slow, quiet consequence of truth entering a space that had been built for silence. And somehow that felt appropriate." Healing didn't arrive as forgiveness. It arrived as understanding, and even that came unevenly. I learned to hold two truths at once, that my mother had been a young woman trapped in a dangerous marriage, and that a man had died during her escape from it, that my father had acted out of love, and that love had required moral compromise. I stopped trying to make it simpler than it was. My relationship with them changed. It became more adult, less idealized, more honest. I no longer saw them as moral anchors, but as people who had made decisions under pressure and lived with the consequences quietly for decades. My mother began telling me small stories from her early life, not just about Thomas, but about who she'd been before fear narrowed her world. My father listened, sometimes leaving the room when the memories became too heavy. Other times he stayed and held her hand. There was no grand apology, none was needed. What we built instead was space. Space for complexity, space for grief that had never been named. Space for a love that had been forged in survival rather than innocence. The anniversary decorations came down. Life resumed its routines, but something essential had shifted. We no longer pretended that endurance was the same as purity. I found peace not in resolution, but in truth spoken softly and late. I still think about that toast sometimes. About how one unguarded sentence, spoken in a room full of people and years of habit, cracked open a story that had been sealed for half a lifetime. If there's anything this taught me, it's that the people who raise us are more complicated than the roles they play. They are not just mothers and fathers. They are survivors, witnesses, participants in choices made long before we arrive. We inherit their silence as much as their love. I don't regret knowing the truth. It cost me a certain innocence, but it gave me something sturdier in return: empathy without illusion, respect without blindness. If you're listening to this and carrying a family story that doesn't quite add up, I hope you remember that understanding doesn't require condemnation. Sometimes it simply asks us to sit with discomfort and let it change us. The question I carry now is a quiet one, and I'll leave it with you too. If you knew everything about the people you love, would you still choose to stand beside them? And if the answer is yes, what kind of love does that make you capable of? Thank you for listening.